All right. Thank you so much for having me, Sarah. And I have never been down to this corner of Ohio, so it's really, really lovely to be here today. So as Sarah said, I'm a social and environmental psychologist. And so my main focus as a professional and an activist has been, how can we take insights from the field of psychology and use them to help us live in a more sustainable way, live in a more harmonious way with our natural world. And in the process, we can actually improve our own lives as well. And so that will be kind of the theme of the talk today. So first, I'm going to identify two problems. Of course, we have a lot of problems right now, but I'm only going to talk about two. And then I'm going to introduce a little bit about human beings and how we work so that we can have a better understanding of how to solve those two problems, at least partially, with one solution. And then we'll talk about how you can act on some of the information that I'm conveying. So one of the problems that we have is that, at least here in the United States and in many other industrialized countries, we are actually very unhappy people. We are the most medicated, depressed, anxious, overweight, and lonely people that perhaps have ever lived. And this is really kind of remarkable because there are so many of us and we have such great resources and we have so much knowledge, and yet we are actually not in a very good place. There are many of us who are really not happy. In 2023, the Surgeon General declared that we have a loneliness epidemic. And in fact, research showed that 1 out of 2 adults in the United States experience loneliness on a very regular basis. That's half of us, which is really kind of a shocking number. We know that loneliness, it can actually be as physically bad for you as smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. So this is, isn't that shocking? But it's true. So this is actually a big deal that we are so isolated from each other. It's not only making us unhappy, it's making us physically sick. So we have another problem, and this is one that I spent a lot of time thinking about, and that's climate change. So we are increasing carbon levels in our atmosphere at an alarming rate. Temperature is skyrocketing. 2024 was the hottest year on record. And the climate models make it clear that no matter what we do today, the temperatures are going to keep climbing for at least another 10, 15 years, and then we'll see what happens. What we do now determines what happens after that. The crazy weather has all kinds of implications. It has implications for health, air quality, being able to breathe. Asthma rates are skyrocketing. It has implications for our ability to feed ourselves, to grow food. It has implications for our infrastructure, our ability to just live our everyday lives, driving to work, for example. So the ecosystem that supports us is on the edge of collapse. And that's as depressing as I'm going to get today. It's all that for here. So I want to argue that these two things are not randomly happening at the same time, coincidentally, but these two things are related. And of course, there are lots of ways that we can understand these two phenomena. All of those different ways we might look at it have value. But today, I'm going to share my perspective. And to do that, we need to talk about Tickle Me Elmo for a few minutes. So, who in the room has purchased a Tickle Me Elmo? Okay, a few of you. So back in 1996, it was the toy that every parent had to buy their kid. And then the Tyco company had made a million, seemed like enough. But by Black Friday, they had been sold out, and people got absolutely crazy. So there were these 2 women in New York City who got into a fist fight and were arrested because they were fighting over a Tickle Me Elmo. That was Chicago, sorry. There were people in New York City chasing delivery trucks down the road to try to be able to get something straight off the truck before it went into the store. There was someone stocking shelves who got trampled because people were so anxious about getting their hands on one of these dolls. And they retailed for $28.99, but scalpers were selling them for $1,500. that doesn't make any sense, right? That is super, super weird behavior. And if we could somehow, could we get people that excited about fighting climate change? Like, wow, that would really be pretty awesome. Now, before you think, oh, that was just a weird tickle me Elmo thing, it's not. This is not new at all. So before that, when I was a kid, it was Cabbage Patch Dolls. Look how ugly they are. Why do they notice? And, you know, back in the 1700s, it was tulips, right? The tulip mania, where people were spending upwards of $1,000 in dollars at the time for a single tulip bulb. So this is something that humans do. We do it over and over and over again. Let me throw it out to the audience. Why were parents so determined to get that Tickle Me Elmo? Why would they be motivated to do that? Saying that's what their kids wanted. Yeah, that's what their kids wanted, right? They were doing something for their child. They were seeing the ads on TV, and their children wanted that, and they wanted to do something for their child. And so they were willing to do outrageous things, you know, get up at 3 a.m. and stand outside Macy's in the rain so that they could be the first people to get in the store, and, you know, just crazy, crazy stuff. And if you look around, you will see that humans often engage in behavior that, from a completely rational, self-interested perspective, from an economic perspective, really doesn't make any sense at all. So, for example, in all cultures throughout history, as far as we can tell, there have been numerous groups who have asked their new participants to go through some kind of ritual before they can become members, right? And sometimes those rituals are incredibly painful. They could be humiliating, disgusting, dangerous, sometimes even deadly. But people want to do these things to become members of a group. And the ultimate example, perhaps, is people who are willing to strap bombs to their bodies and blow their physical selves up, destroy their biological body for a social cause that they believe in. So this is really interesting behavior. And understanding why people would be willing to do these things has, for me, been a really helpful way to think about why people are the way they are, how to shape and change their behavior. And it's also actually made me a more effective activist and kind of a kinder person, actually. So here's the argument, and this is a perspective that I use in all my courses. I use it in my activist life. I use it in my personal life. And the argument goes like this. Humans, of course, are biological creatures. And just like any other biological organism, we evolved a set of biological motives that help keep us alive. So hunger and thirst, for example, right? However, humans are also obligatorily social creatures, meaning we can't live by ourselves. An infant cannot survive to even toddlerhood if it is not cared for. And when people are deprived of social contact, they really suffer. They really suffer for it. So we evolved our main adaptive strategy. Well, we got opposable thumbs, right? But our main adaptive strategy was living in these cooperative social groups, and that is what allowed us to survive. So we evolved a set of social motives that drive our behavior as strongly as our biological motives. And we evolved those motives because they're adaptive, because they helped our ancestors survive. And what you'll find is that people in all cultures will demonstrate these motives. So these core social motives I'm about to present have been extensively studied all over the world. However, there's a lot of variability in how different cultures teach their cultural members to pursue these goals. So I don't want to say everybody's all the same, but there's a certain sense in which we are all the same. We all evolved these core motives. Now, the most important one, and the one I'm going to talk about the most today, is the need to belong. For our ancestors, being a member of the group was literally the difference between life and death. It was literally a matter of survival. And I don't know if you've noticed how irritating other people can be. But so imagine that, like there's got to be something holding us together, right? So for our ancestors, the humans who were motivated to remain in those relationships and stay a part of the group were the ones that were more likely to survive. So let me describe how psychologists sometimes study this core social motive. They study the phenomenon of ostracism. Think about a time when you felt rejected or alone or ostracized. Those experiences are actually really painful. So in one paradigm, they have people come in, they sit them in front of a computer, and they're playing a virtual game of catch. So they see little icons of the other participants, and they can choose who to throw the ball to, and then the ball comes to them. And so they start, and everybody's throwing the ball around, everybody's playing nice. And then partway through the study, the other players all stop throwing. Imagine, they all stop throwing to you. So you're just sitting there, and the ball is going, and nobody's throwing the ball to you. Well, imagine also that you're hooked up to an fMRI machine. What happens when people are rejected in this way is the part of their brain that processes physical pain is what lights up. This is just a stupid psychology experiment, and they don't even know these people, and it's just a dumb game. There's not even a real ball, right? But it is so painful to be rejected. We are so sensitive to being rejected that it literally physically hurts. So we are incredibly motivated by our need to belong. We have two other core social motives. We need to feel like the world makes some kind of sense, and we need to feel like we can have some impact on it. And then we need to feel basically worthy, basically good about ourselves, and we need to feel like we can trust the people around us. So if you think back to some of the worst moments of your life, I bet you anything that what was going on was one or more of these core social motives was being challenged. And so when one of our core social motives is threatened, we are hardwired to react really strongly. Now, this is a little bit of an aside from the things that I really want to talk about, but I find this a really helpful perspective, so I thought I would take a minute to share it. So you, I'm sure, have run into people on many occasions that were being completely defensive, irrational, like they were digging in their heels, they were being stubborn about something, they were completely ignoring data and evidence, they weren't recognizing how right you were, right? So what's happening when people get in that sort of like claws out mode is they feel like one or more of their core social motives is being challenged. So maybe your brilliant idea makes them feel like you don't respect them or that you're trying to take away their agency. And when I can remember that what's happening is, no, the person isn't just stupid and irrational, they're a human and they have these needs and those needs are being challenged. It actually allows me not only to be more effective at how I try to go about getting what I want, but also more compassionate, because I remind myself, okay, I also react that way when my needs are threatened. When we have chronic unmet needs, we do things like numb out, hence all the antidepressants we take and alcohol and eating food. You know, I love French fries. That's what I do, so numb out. We become apathetic. We basically give up, right? And I think you see a lot of that in our culture right now. Okay. So these two things are related. We are unhappy, and I'm oversimplifying a bit. So obviously there's lots more we could say about these two issues. However, there is a common theme, right? We are unhappy because we're disconnected. We're disconnected from each other, and we're disconnected from the natural systems that support us. And we fail to act to protect our environment because we are disconnected. We're disconnected from each other, and we're disconnected from the natural systems that support us. So it is the same root cause. It is disconnection that has left us lonely and isolated and numbing ourselves out with French fries, and also ineffective at responding to the threat of climate change and other environmental threats. So let me talk first about how disconnection impacts our ability to respond to climate change. So when I say we're disconnected, we are disconnected from the natural world on so many levels that are radically different from how human beings have lived for the vast majority of our time on this planet. Geographic mobility, for example. Several people have asked me, oh, where are you from? And I have to list 4 different places, right? Because I've lived in a bunch of different places. And so what that means is, yeah, I know what the weather was like in Ohio. I've lived there for 20 years now, but I haven't lived there for 60 years. My grandparents didn't live there. There's knowledge of place that almost all humans had about where they were living that a lot of us do not have because we have become so mobile. We have moved around so much. So we don't necessarily notice that things are changing. We also adapt really quickly to change. And so unless we have a long history of lived knowledge, we might feel like, maybe things are changing, but I'm not really sure. Another thing that makes it hard for us to really viscerally connect to what's happening to our planet is that we spend over 90% of our time in buildings. And that certainly did not used to be true. And not only are we in these buildings, but these buildings are pretty much climate-controlled spaces, right? So we're engaging in behaviors that are altering our climate, but all we have to do is go inside and crank up the thermostat, and we're okay. And that is, again, a radical shift from how human beings lived for the vast majority of their existence. Another thing that's really quite different is that for us living in this very affluent Western culture, industrialized culture, all of our resources are delivered to us on demand. I mean, you can even order your grocery. You don't even have to drive to the grocery store anymore to get your food. All you have to do for energy or for warmth is flip a switch or turn a thermostat. For water, you turn a tap. For most human beings, gathering these things that we need for basic biological necessities was something that they had to put energy and effort into. So 100 years ago, someone knew how much effort it took to heat their house because they were chopping the wood and they were hauling the wood and they were stoking the fire. They knew how much effort it took to have clean drinking water because they were hauling that water themselves. And now we live in these buildings where the systems that support our fundamental biological needs are actually completely invisible. And I remember talking with somebody working at the utility company, and basically he sees his whole role is to make us never have to think about energy. Like he wants it to be completely outlined. And I was saying to him, that's not a good thing, but no, that's his goal. So that's the world that we live in. We are disconnected from the resources that support us and what's happening to our environment in a way that humans have never been before. So we don't know how that story is going to end. We're also disconnected from each other. So let me ask, if you had to guess, what percentage of people in Ohio are concerned about climate change? What's your guess?
20%.
20? 60? 60? You think 60?
Okay.
Most people guess around 30%, and it's actually 70%. Yeah, it's 70%. Over 50% of people who identify as Republican are concerned about climate change. But we, as a culture, think nobody else cares about it, and we don't talk about it. And so, in fact, a colleague of mine got into a huge fight with people at the New York Natural History Museum because they were afraid that if they talked about climate change in their exhibits, there were going to be all these angry patrons who were, would come storming in and accusing them of political propaganda. And that's actually just not true. It's not going to happen. However, this misconception silences us. It keeps us from sharing our concerns with each other. It keeps us from talking about what we might do. And that, of course, disables our ability to engage in collective action. We also have a cultural narrative that pushes individual consumer-based solutions to environmental problems. And it's not that those things aren't bad to do. I mean, you should absolutely buy your recycled toilet paper, and you should bring your bag to the grocery store, and you should put solar panels on your car, and you should buy an electric car. You should absolutely do all those things. And it is not enough because it is this larger system that we're embedded in that we really don't have very much influence over. That is the fundamental source of the biggest piece of the problem, right? But if our attention is directed at ourselves and what we can do, then our attention is not directed at the larger powers that could actually be making a much bigger difference if they were just pressured to do so. which brings me to my final point, which is that when we are disconnected from each other, we are less able to take collective action. And it's collective action that's required to solve such a huge problem as climate change. So that's how disconnection impacts our ability to respond to and care for and nurture the environment. What about disconnection impacting our happiness? And here I'm talking specifically about our disconnection from nature. So, of course, nature meets our biological needs, but nature also meets our social needs. And I don't know, when I say this to psychologists, they're very skeptical. They don't believe me because psychology is actually a very anthropocentric discipline. I'm imagining, I've forgotten your name already. I'm so sorry. Does this sound weird to you, or does it seem like obvious?
A little weird.
A little weird. Okay, thank you for being honest. So this may not be the most obvious thing in the world, but bear with me. So there is evidence that nature can fulfill these core social motives as often as well as humans can. And there's some cases where nature can fulfill it better. Because think about, I don't know how many people here have dogs or pets, but your dog loves you unconditionally, right? Your dog loves you no matter what you do. Whereas humans can get mad at you, and they can hold a grudge, and they can judge you. And so there are some ways in which actually belonging can be easier with animals or with nature, because with people, they're looking at you while you're looking at them, and we know that. And we're always a little bit on stage when we're with other people, whereas with nature, that's not true. And so nature has the ability to give us a sense of connection and belonging. Oh, I meant to point out, by the way, that these 5 core social motives, they form an acronym, BUCKET, missing the K. And so sometimes people later come up to me and say, what were they again? And so the acronym BUCKET can maybe help you remember that. Where was I? So, yes, belonging. So there are actually quite a number of ways that we can develop meaningful psychological relationships with the natural world that can fulfill these motives. You're going out to collect salamanders. You are expanding your understanding by engaging in the natural world. When we are able to garden and harvest a crop, actually harvesting from your garden releases dopamine, which is the reward neurotransmitter in your brain. That gives us a sense of control. We can get enormous satisfaction from climbing a mountain. And feeling like you are safe in the natural world is one of the most peaceful experiences a person can have. So, examples of our psychological connection to nature. We anthropomorphize. Well, we anthropomorphize all kinds of things, right? I'm sure someone in this room has talked to their car or screamed at their printer, right? But there are lots of examples in many cultures around the world where they very specifically and sometimes ritualistically anthropomorphize nature. And so, for example, the Canadian Cree think of animals as having many of the psychological properties that people do. In Thailand, one of their most successful methods for combating deforestation has actually been to ordain trees in the forest and give those trees the properties and the respect of monks. New Zealand was, I believe, the first country to give a natural entity legal rights. So this is the Wanganui River, and the Wanganui River has protection under the law and kinds of protections that people have. So there are lots of examples of cultures around the world thinking of nature in ways that are human-like. And I bet you all have done that too, at least a little bit. So imagine that you are watching a squirrel. You're watching maybe squirrels chase each other, and you develop a story in your head about how they're having fun, or maybe you say, oh, this one's a bully, or whatever, right? You're turning them into humans. You're thinking about them
as having some of the characteristics that humans have. We pair bond. So we can become incredibly attached to dogs are perhaps the most common example, but cats, other kinds of pets, we can become incredibly attached to place. I'm going to talk about that in the next slide, sorry. We engage in caretaking behavior. These are all things we do with humans, right? And there's actually a huge literature on place attachment. So we develop a deep emotional bond to a place, right? You could develop a bond towards a tree, you could develop a bond towards a field, a stream. These are all things that we do. And I will challenge you and say that if you can think of a human-human relationship, you can find some analog of a human-nature relationship. So humans connect with other individuals, humans connect with individual animals and plants, humans connect with an ecosystem, humans connect with groups, humans connect with this feeling of humanity, right? Humans connect with the feeling of planet Earth. So the same systems, the same psychological systems that we use to think about humans, we use those also often, not always, but often, to think about the natural world. These systems that we have in our brains they can be used for all kinds of things. And because nature is animated, anything that's animated puts our social cognition system on high alert. So anytime something is moving, the part of our brain that processes social information turns on. And so it's not a surprise then that we are thinking about nature in many of the same ways that we think about people. If you also think about it, when we evolved, I told you, we evolved to really want to belong to people because that was the difference between life or death. So was understanding our ecosystem. That was also the difference between life or death. So both nature and other people had a huge, profound impact on our evolution.
How might we measure a sense of connection to nature? There are probably a dozen different scales out there. My colleague and I created one. Lots of other researchers have come along and created similar scales with slightly different theoretical perspectives. I don't think any of that is all that interesting. What I'm showing you here is, I think, one of the most intuitively easy measures to grasp. And so just ask yourself, which of these 7 diagrams do you think best describes your relationship with the natural world? So this is something that's been used in a variety of studies. There's a different version of this, actually, that's been used to measure your closeness with an individual. It's also been used to measure your sense of identity with a group. So it's, it's a very flexible tool. Okay. So there are a tremendous number of documented benefits of connecting with the natural world. And every time I give a talk and I sort of go and poke around and update things, I discover more articles that describe more things. So some of the most common findings, and these are very, very robust findings, spending time in nature it lifts your mood. It leads to better cognitive functioning. So even a 10 or 15 minute walk outside can improve your ability to function cognitively. They've done studies looking at people in hospitals who either have window rooms with views of nature versus views of, the side of a building. And people in rooms with views of nature recover faster and they need less pain medication. It helps you downregulate stress hormones like cortisol. And it also decreases depression and anxiety. One of my favorite findings is that there are bacteria in the soil that actually help your body release serotonin. So literally sticking your hands in the soil is good for you. It helps improve your mood. It has some bigger, longer-term impacts as well. It slows aging. So research has looked at, people know what telomeres are. So telomeres are the caps that are on the end of your DNA. And one of the signs of aging is the telomeres kind of disintegrating. And so they looked at the length of telomeres of people who have high levels of nature exposure versus low levels of nature exposure. And people who spend more time in nature their aging process is slow. Their telomeres are longer. People who have a greater sense of connection to nature have a greater sense of meaning and purpose in life, and they have higher life satisfaction overall. They feel like life is worth living, that life is good. So I just want to point out that all of these benefits that I just mentioned are also true of benefits we get from relationships with other people. So literally the exact same list, except the bacteria in the soil. Humans don't do that, but humans help us release serotonin in all kinds of other ways. So there really is a parallel here between the meaning that we get from our human relationships and the meaning that we get from our natural relationships. So that's what we get from nature. What does nature get from us being connected to it? Well, there's a huge literature of research that makes very clear that we are motivated to protect what we feel connected to. That's why people were willing to spend $1,500 for a Tickle Me Elmo, right? Because they loved their child and they wanted to give their child what they wanted. They didn't want to disappoint their child. Lots of research shows that people who feel more of a connection to the natural world are much more likely to engage in pro-environmental behavior. And the kinds of pro-environmental behavior people have looked at in the research is very broad. So it includes small things like people who are more connected are more likely to recycle. They use less electricity in their homes. They're more likely to drive an electric car. They're more likely to vote for candidates who take a stance on environmental issues. So feeling like we're connected to something is one of the most positive ways we can motivate action to protect the environment, because not only is it good for the environment, but it's good for us too. And I think this is a really important point that I want to hammer home, because I think sometimes there's a narrative in our culture that is very cynical and that says that people are selfish and people are apathetic and people don't care. And that's certainly true of some people. But it's also true that humans are capable of profound self-sacrifice for something that they really love, for something that they value. And let's never lose sight of that. Let's never underestimate the ability and the motivation of people to come together and work hard and sacrifice for something that they love and care for. Okay, I got to circle back and say one more thing that we get out of caring for nature, which is, again, lots and lots of research on the fact that when we engage in helping behavior, whether it's for people or for the environment, we benefit. And this really does seem to be hardwired into it. This is the reward, right? So we have this motivation to want to to maintain our belonging and to stay connected. The reward is that it feels good. When we do something nice for someone, it feels good. When we do something nurturing, it leads to longer-term happiness. So one of my favorite studies, they gave people $25 and they told people either spend it on yourself or spend it on somebody else. And then they tracked their mood for the next 5 days. And the people who spent it on themselves, their mood just first day, they were in a pretty good mood, and then their mood just went down. The people who spent it on somebody else, there was a little drop from day 1 to day 2, and then it leveled out. They were happier 5 days later, having spent $25 on somebody else. So once again, when we engage in behavior, when we nurture nature, we are getting benefits as well. So hopefully I've convinced you at this point that you should put down your phones and you should go outside. How might we connect to the natural world? And I want to emphasize that there's a way that connecting to nature is equal opportunity. You don't have to be able to take 2 weeks off from work and travel to wilderness and do some kind of spiritual thing where you never see any human and you're, literally surrounded by nature. I mean, that's awesome. I encourage you to do it if you can. but absolutely not necessary to connect to the natural world. In fact, by simply watching my slideshow with all those nature pictures in it, you are already more connected than you were when you walked in. So I'm drawing now from a really great handbook that is available for free, PDF you can download, called the Nature Connection Handbook. This was developed by colleagues in the UK. And two really important points to make before we get into the details. The first is that connection is about moments, not minutes or hours or days or weeks. Really, connection is about paying attention. So you could be on the top of a mountain in the most beautiful place in the world, but if you were staring at your cell phone, you were not connecting to nature. You could be sitting right here in this room and looking out at that maple tree and watching the wind blow it and looking at the colors of the leaves and noticing the patterns that the leaves make. And you could have a profound experience of connection to nature. So it's really about attention. It's about these moments. It's about noticing what's around you. And nature is everywhere, even in the middle of a city. The other thing is that it's experiential. This is not a rational thing. It's about opening to a feeling and opening to an experience. You're using a different part of your brain than the one you use for when you do your taxes, right? And so opening to that, so some of us may be uncomfortable with that, but it's actually such a huge relief. I experience it. I think I do a lot of thinking with my brain as part of my job. And when I can put my brain down and just open into the feeling, it's a huge relief. So the researchers in the UK have identified what they call 5 pathways to nature connection. And let's just talk really briefly about each of those. So the first is about the senses. It's about noticing. It's about attention. It's about what I was talking about just a second ago when I directed your attention to that tree over there. So Sarah told me that you guys did a forest bathing exercise, right? So a really big part of that is just the sensory experience of the natural world. And so that's what you see pictured here. The woman is feeling the bark. One of the most relaxing things that you can hear is birdsong. You're welcome. So something interesting about birdsong, actually, one reason that we think it is psychologically so relaxing is that it's a sign. It would have been a cue to our ancestors that all was well. There were not predators nearby, because that kind of birdsong. There are alarm bird calls that birds make when there are predators, but that kind of song they won't do if they're a predator. So there might be a deeply ingrained reason why birdsong, it's a cue to us that says, okay, you're safe. There is beauty and amazement to be noticed everywhere. Even a dandelion growing in a crack in your sidewalk that you maybe wish weren't there, if you take a look at it closely, you will see that it is beautiful. If you go right down this hallway and out the door, there is a series of nature photos that illustrate this perfectly. Those photos completely depict these small little pockets of nature in such a beautiful way. And that is available to anyone pretty much anywhere. Another emotion that nature can often embody is big emotions like awe and wonder and joy. And of course, being in a stunning landscape makes that really, really easy. But again, those stunning landscapes aren't the only way to experience beauty and awe. So this is just a regular tree. But have you ever sat at the base of a tree and looked up? It's actually quite amazing. Our our modern culture doesn't have a lot in it that connects us to the natural world, but that certainly did not used to be the case for most cultures. And one of the things I worry about is that children today spend much less time playing outside than I did, for example. So when I was a kid, I would spend hours walking up and down a stream that ran behind the houses on my street. And I knew every little nook and cranny, and this was where the frogs would hang out, and this is where there was a little waterfall, and, I knew it all. Those experiences are really important, and I think making sure that our children and our grandchildren have those kinds of experiences, those are foundational to a lifelong sense of connection to the natural world. There are cultures that do have ritual relationships with the natural world. For example, a lot of pagan traditions will honor that Samhain is coming up. It's the time that's like halfway between the equinox and the solstice. So there's a whole series of rituals that mark the seasons. My friends and I actually created our own ritual. We call it equinox. And so twice a year, so this is called an analemma, in case you're wondering. And so this is, I forget which it is. But anyway, this is one of the equinoxes, and that's the other equinox up there. And so twice a year we get together and we eat local foods, and we make silly toasts, so we play silly games, and just sort of take a moment to recognize these moments where the light and the dark are balanced. And it gives us an opportunity to reflect about things in our lives. It gives us an opportunity to come together. And those kinds of rituals would have been a normal part of many human societies throughout history. Compassion is, I think are we on the fifth one? Can't remember whether we're on the fourth or the fifth one, but caring and nurturing nature. And we've already talked about all the benefit that brings for you, right? But that is another really powerful way to connect. Okay. Another important point is that when we come together in groups to protect the natural world, it's actually one of the best ways to meet your 5 core social motives. So y'all back there in your organization are doing great. And it gives you a sense of belonging, that you are part of something that's bigger than yourself. It gives you a lens for understanding how to have an impact in the world. When we come together as a group, we are more powerful and can accomplish more. We feel good about ourselves, and we have a group of people that we can trust. So activism is a really powerful way to get your own needs met. So my takeaways here, the things that I would hope that you would remember from this talk, that humans have these core psychological needs that can drive our behavior in ways that on the surface seem crazy. But those psychological needs are just as powerful as our biological needs. And we can meet both our psychological and our biological needs by caring for the natural world. So when we nurture nature, it nurtures us. We benefit enormously from our relationship with the natural world, and nature benefits from our connection to it. And then finally, I hope if there's anything you remember, it's that the connections that we build, it really is about moments of attention. And then it's true for human relationships as well as natural relationships. So just one last example of the parallel between benefits that we get from humans and from nature. There's some really interesting research looking at minimal social interactions. So these are the interactions like you have a chat with someone that's checking you out at the grocery store. And it turns out that those minimal social interactions actually have as much impact on your mental and physical health as more sustained interpersonal relationships do. We need connection. We need it. And our connection to the natural world is just as important as our connection to other people. And there's so much to be gained from going out there and forming those connections. So I hope that you, on your way home, stop and notice the clouds and the trees, that you take a minute to look in your yard and notice how beautiful the blades of grass are. And maybe you have a potluck and invite your friends over and you talk about what you're going to do to plant native plants in your garden. So thank you very much. We were going to open it up for any questions that you might have or comments as well. Yeah. So the picture of the person bottle feeding the fawn inspired this question for me. So I don't know how things are in Oberlin, but in Oxford we have a deer overpopulation. Yeah. So like a pretty serious. And so I'm also with Wildwood, and so we spend a lot of time chopping down honeysuckle, chopping down multiflora rose, chopping down autumn olive. So it's this very interesting thing where a lot of what caring for nature looks like here involves destruction and killing, and it's something that we train our kids to use. There's a lot of volunteering where we want our kids to be doing that. And so it's this very strange thing where it requires almost this cerebral access to like a higher order of thinking about why this frankly unpleasant act of destruction is necessary. And so I guess it's this conundrum that I feel like we're put in. Yeah, to really nurture nature, at least in this locality. Yeah, involves almost like a practice of violence. Yeah. So I wanted to think about, I wanted to see what wisdom does psychology have for us, or social science have for us in how we can handle that, because honestly it's kind of a bummer. Yeah, I hear you. That's such a great example, and I'll tell you what immediately popped into my head is remembering taking my newborn child in. I don't know, a couple weeks old. I don't know how old they were, but to get their vaccines, and it was the first time this baby had experienced pain, right? And I did it to them, and they got this shot, and it felt like I was just betraying my baby, right? But I was doing it because it was actually good for them. And so it strikes me that it's a very similar situation, right? And so I think I have two thoughts. Number one is, so humans have this incredible emotional system that provides us all kinds of instantaneous, valuable feedback about our environment, and it motivates our behavior, and it's awesome, and it has flaws and it has limitations. And so we have a cerebral cortex that allows us to do that higher level thought. And so this is one of those times, just like with vaccinating my baby, that you have to activate the cerebral cortex, right, and do that higher level thought to see the bigger picture. So I talked about connecting to nature as a feeling thing. I don't want to imply that we don't also need to use our brains. I mean, fake, because we do. The other thought I had was when you're pulling out the roses, and I don't know if you guys have that horrible knotweed, Japanese knotweed down here. Oh, that stuff is so evil. When you're getting rid of that stuff, you are making space for native species that are supposed to be there, right? And so I think one way to frame it is not you are destroying this species, but you are creating space for another species. And that, I think, it's a more palatable way to frame it. But really great point and really great example that all of this is complicated. And I'm aware of the fact that, in this talk, I've oversimplified a number of things. And so I appreciate your question for complicating things, because it is in fact quite complicated. Yeah.
I don't know if we have the level of understanding or resolution issue, but how much in nature substitutes for social, how much does social substitute for nature? Do you have any idea that, does Tom Hanks in Castaway do it just fine?
Right, yeah. I don't think we know the answer definitively to that. I think they're not the same. We do have an incredible ability to anthropomorphize, right? And so if you think you're having a conversation with the basketball,
Yeah.
Maybe you are, right? I think probably the answer is it really depends on the person. Like there are examples of people who have gone into the natural world and they don't have contact with people, and they actually seem like they're really happy and they're functioning well. And introverts might have an easier time not having people and instead having more nature. A lot of animal people are introverts because they find animals less demanding and easier to deal with than people, right? So my guess is that the vast majority of us need both, and that their people vary on how much they could get their needs met through one versus the other. I think it's probably very few people who don't need other people, who could really be, happy completely alone. So yeah, I think the scale tips towards needing people, but there are examples of people who, have seemed to be happy and functioning well, and they seem mentally healthy with very minimal social contact. So, yeah.
I think an example of that is a sunset. You go out and look at it, and it's so much more enjoyable when you have somewhere to look at it with.
Yes. So that's it. That is a great point, actually, that these two sources of belonging can augment each other. It's also true that spending time with the person in front of a sunset instead of in some boring room is better, right? So connecting with the natural world and connecting with people, doing those things together, they build on each other. Yeah, thank you for that point.
Yeah, you touched on how, I was surprised at the percentage of people who are worried in Ohio about climate change, right? And how we just don't know and we don't connect enough about it. How is your work? How are you using that to try to fix that?
Well, that's a great question. So one project that we have going right now, it's actually, I am giving a talk tomorrow on campus. I'm not pressuring any of you to go, but I will be talking about this research tomorrow. So we have developed some technology. Lots of places have digital signage, right? And so content will rotate through. So in Oberlin and in Cleveland and in Toledo, there's a system of these digital signs that rotate through a variety of different content. And part of the content that rotates through is something we call community voices. And so these are a series of images and pictures, local, like not stock photo, but actual pictures from the community, and quotes from community members. And so we have students go out and do interviews, and they extract quotes. And so when you're walking around Oberlin, you'll see your neighbor's picture pop up and a quote, and it's a way of sharing with the rest of the community what other people are thinking and feeling. And we don't talk about this stuff very much, so we don't know what other people are doing or how concerned they are, how committed they are. So our most recent project very explicitly collected information about climate for the purpose of dispelling this myth that nobody cares. And our first initial study suggests that it did successfully shift people's misperceptions, that people were more accurately understanding how concerned other people are about climate change. And our next project that we're about to launch is looking at messages that come from conservatives talking about climate change, because there are conservatives who are concerned about climate change. And can we influence a conservative audience if they see people who are like them expressing concern, which doesn't happen. I mean, there are a few famous examples of conservative politicians who came out and said, yes, we got to do something about climate change, and then they lost their primaries, right? So there have been people who have been punished for speaking out about their concern. And so we don't know yet whether that's going to work, but that is one strategy. It's sort of, think of it as like you're exposed to ads all the time, and they're influencing you unconsciously. And so the idea behind community voices is that we're putting positive messages out there, examples of people just like you, people that that live down the street from you, thinking and doing positive things to help change the norms and help people realize they're not alone. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for those times you can't get out because you might be stuck in your office,
Yeah.
but you just feel stressed and you want something, I brought in an essential oil diffuser.
Yes.
One of my favorite oils is all year long Christmas tree. Because it just, that and oregano and basil. I mean, people come in like, throughout this, and so what's
Yeah.
that on? And it's,
So our olfactory senses are very deeply connected to our emotional system. So that's a really powerful thing you can do. You can also, I mean, watching videos or looking at pictures. Like I have a calendar from the Audubon Society in my office, and I will just look up and look at the picture. Another thing, today is not the best day to make this point, but most of us can look up and see the sky from our windows. And looking up at the sky is another really powerful way to just like get outside of your own little cubicle and feel a sense of expansiveness and connection to something bigger. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's a great strategy. Yeah, you had a question.
I was wondering about the metrics on being closer to nature. If there are themes or frameworks that they use, the thing that came to my mind was how comfortable are you different living situations in nature. But I didn't know how the metrics.
Yeah, I have never seen that as a metric, but I love it. I think that's a brilliant idea. So some of the metrics, the scale that I developed measures the sense to which people feel like they are an egalitarian member, like not above nature, but part of a natural community. Other researchers have looked at the extent to which nature is a part of how we think of our self-identity. Other researchers have used attachment theory, which is a theory to explain how babies bond with their parents, to talk about. I don't like that one as much, but so a whole bunch of different ways. Some people use like a behavioral measure, like do you do things that we would expect someone who feels connected to nature would do? Like when you go on a trip, do you bring stones home? Do you have pictures of nature in your office? Do you? So all those different ways. I really like the comfort idea because one of the things that makes it hard for people to connect to nature is if they feel uncomfortable in the natural world, if they feel unsafe. So people, for example, who are really afraid of bugs or really don't like dirt, it's hard for them to connect to the natural world because nature feels threatening. So that I like that. I think that's a really interesting idea.
I might have lots of examples for you.
Yeah.
so at some point I was reading Ministry for the Future, right? So Ministry for the Future saw some novel that describes a ministry whose goal is in the UN to advocate for future peace. And it proposes both, it starts in a very dark place, maybe in 2016, where there's a lot of people die from a heat event in India, but then it kind of walks through at great length all of these positive scenarios that this ministry undertakes to kind of help us dig ourselves out of this mess. And one of the scenarios that's posited in this is something like a global nature religion, where people have kind of this ethical, they have this ethical social connection to the idea of advocating for nature. And it's interesting to me because I feel like there's, over time, there's transcendentalism, there's movements, within organized religious movements outside. There's the UN tries to assemble all of these different things that people do in faith communities to advocate for nature. But there's all this like stuff that's in that vicinity, but it feels like it never gels in a way where we have sort of a global ethic. And I guess I'm wondering if you have a sense of is there some sort of hack or psychological hack that we could employ that might help us kind of get into a space where we really are thinking about the rights of nature and some kind of, or even the rights of the future in a way that's moving beyond ourselves? Or why do we find ourselves moving in our ability to just hit that almost like global ethics that would get us into a better space with this? So it feels like we're in an unraveling of whatever we even had achieved in the last 20 years.
Yeah. Well, oh, that's really big and deep. I obviously don't have the answer, but just a couple of thoughts. First of all, I want to remind us that we are unraveling in some very real ways, but that unraveling is being executed by actually a tiny minority of human beings. And so when you say it's never quite gelled, I think it has in lots of places, and I think that's all still there. It's just that we're at such a tumultuous time right now where it doesn't feel like it's doing any good, but that doesn't mean it's not. So just want to remind us that the people that are most powerful are actually a tiny minority. And so I would say that our global consciousness about this ethic is probably farther along than it's ever been, and just like democracy too. So there are many ways in which democracy is under attack and around the world. And yet, right now, more people live in a democratic, more people get to vote for their leaders than ever before. So there are ways in which it feels like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And yet we have made so much progress. So I'm an optimist. I just wanted to throw that out there. But in terms of the hack, I guess I see that there are three things that pop into my mind. Number one is we need to start early, that the easiest people to teach are young people. And those very early lessons become just a deep unconscious part of how we see the world. And so I think that is one of the most important places. It's not a hack. Like it's a longer term strategy. We got to wait till those little kids become adults. But I think it's one of the most powerful leverage points that we have. I think another thing that we as a culture in the United States don't do a good job of is teaching systems thinking. So understanding the complex web of causality. I think in our Western culture, for example, when Westerners explain human behavior, we explain it in a very simple way, and we tend to use personality traits. So somebody does something thoughtless, and we're likely to conclude that person is a jerk. People in more Eastern cultures, and I'm speaking very sweepingly and a bit of an oversimplification, but they actually are much less likely to do that. They're much more likely to look at the social situation. They have been trained their entire life to think about their own behavior in the context of a broader social situation. When my kids screwed up feeding the neighbor's dog, it didn't occur to them that I would be embarrassed about that. I was really embarrassed. I was really mad too. But someone in China is taught from a very early age that if you let somebody down, that reflects on the whole family, right? So those Eastern cultures their kids are taught systems thinking about social systems from a very young age. Our kids are not. The Chinese are really good at it. They're really good at teaching their kids this kind of systems thinking. It comes naturally to them. We need that kind of systems thinking about our relationship with the natural world. And as I said before, it's easy to not be able to do it. That was not the right way to say that. It's hard to do it. It's hard to engage in systems thinking about the natural world when we're so disconnected from it, when we have so little information about it. If you think about, do you have any idea which appliance in your house uses the most electricity? Most people have no idea. Why would you, right? So there are all these ways where we have just no clue about what we're doing impacts the natural world. And so my second hack is, can we teach people systems thinking so that when they engage in a behavior, part of them is saying, what's the environmental cost of this? And that's completely unconscious and automatic. And they have the tools to be able to know the answer to that question, right? And again, okay. Here's one hack. A lot of talking. I'm going back to the hack. We need to connect people to the natural world, because when we are connected, we are motivated to do what we need to do. So that's my answer.
Thank for you for talking to us. In the right background.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Any other questions I can answer today?
Yeah. So you shared this we heard the sound of a bird and how that's pleasant to us. But have you looked at sounds that cancel out nature, like the sound of a leaf blower, chainsaw, a different frequency lawnmower, like commercial lawn, right? Versus somebody's little, have you guys looked at that and found that?
No, that's a great, because there may be someone who has done that research. There's nothing I need more in this world than a leaf blower. Yeah, I do that so much.
A frequency that is annoying, not just that someone's not speaking with a grin, but it's the frequency of the in-between.
Yeah. So there is a lot of research on natural design. And so, for example, we like a breeze, but not a blowing thing, because it's constant and whatever. And in nature, it's not constant. It's, it's a breeze. We like curvy lines. So my guess is that if that study has not been done, that we would find that these sounds and visual patterns that are the opposite of nature are unpleasant to us. I do know that, so I've done a lot of research where I expose people to nature, and I often need a control condition. So people need to go do something and have a non-nature experience that's not, it's actually really hard to create that. And there was one time where we had people, instead of walking in the biology greenhouse, which is super cool, we had people walk around this room that's a printing press that had a whole bunch of printing presses, right? And I'm like, okay, nothing about nature here. And what we discovered was the participants were focusing on the wood grain they were finding nature in this room. So my guess is that your hypothesis is 100% correct. We like natural things, and we don't like these artificial things. So I think you're right.
ACRP did a big study on what impacts to humans as far as the noise. Oh, cool, the frequency, but it didn't put into it's canceling out your connection to nature.
Right.
It's just a hazard to your health.
Right. No, my guess is it would make it much harder to connect. Yeah. Yeah.
Like light pollution, too, comes to mind. Yeah. Or as I keep hearing this.
Yeah. I hadn't noticed it until you pointed it out. Thank you.
That's all you're able to hear. Well, I wanted to thank you. And Dr. Frantz is going to be talking again tomorrow. She'll be at noon in 1 Scheidler Hall. It's a brown bag event, so bring your own lunch. But she's going to be talking specifically about reconnecting to nature through technology, shifting knowledge, norms, behavior through digital feedback displays. And if you go on, is it the Oberlin's website? You will see.
Yeah, so if the website, if you don't want to go to the talk, you can just go to this website.
No, go to both.
And it's environmentaldashboard.org is the website. And it's got, it'll walk you through it.
Yeah, it's a community-wide digital feedback platform designed to reconnect people to their resource use and each other. And it's something, when I looked at this and I was looking at this grant and this Reconnected to Nature, Oberlin, and it made me think a lot of Oxford and how this could be a very similar, we could use some of these things as well here. So thank you for coming.
No, you're so welcome. It's a pleasure.
And again, so thankful for this grant, for providing this, and the Friends of the Oxford Lane Library and the Lane Library also provided for this opportunity for us. And thank you to Wild Ones for coming. If you have not, please go back and check out. You can have your own little oasis and in your own backyard. So thank you, everyone.